we have low student test scores in the state, and that's just something that we should realize relative to the rest of the country. If you take a look, for example, the 2015 NAEP just came out, and it's got this really cool website, and you can basically click on a state and see how it differs from all others. And green means that the state is higher than California. The yellows mean you can't distinguish them. And then if there were any states that were lower than California, they would be orange. And if you look at the math in the 4th grade, it's almost all the states are kind of doing significantly better. In reading, there's one state, New Mexico, doing a little bit worse in reading, but California is pretty low. You can see relative to other states. That's true in science as well. 8th grade is doing a little bit better. There are a few states that actually do worse in math than we do: West Virginia, New Mexico, Alabama, Mississippi. But when you look at low-income populations, this is the 8th grade where we were doing overall pretty well. We're not doing so well for our low income. Only Alabama is lower. If you look at the poor, the eligible means eligible for free lunch. Only Alabama and Michigan, I guess maybe, is that some other small state, Connecticut, I think. And then for Hispanics, we're also doing not as well. So, you know, we have some opportunities for improvement is one way of thinking about that. We've also been a low to mid spending state, and the best comparisons I can do are actually 2014, because that's where you can get national comparisons. So we're doing a little better maybe than 2014, but we are still low spending, and we're really low spending when you consider the income that we have. So if you look at this map, the very light ones are the lowest spending ones, like Oklahoma and Utah, but we're at the next level. And again, this was in 2014, nowhere near anything like the whole Northeast or anything like that. We're much more in the Texas, Florida range of spending. But when you look at it compared to per $1,000 of personal income, we're even lower. So then we get into the lowest group. So we're just kind of a relatively low achieving and low spending state. So then what would it mean to have an adequate system? And this is the setup for these guys. There are just 5 things that I thought we should consider when we're thinking about how do we get a system that's adequate. And the first is, you know, which goals do we care about? And I think, as Mike said, the state's made a lot of progress kind of defining what we care about. Courts actually sometimes do this too. They have, like, what should students learn? The kind of famous one was Kentucky, Rose versus the Board of Education, I think, where they actually defined all these things kids should be able to do, like understand governmental processes, have self-knowledge and a grounding in the arts. So it can be quite robust. And I think California's done a lot to get there. My own sense is that we also want to have some sense of what we think kids should experience. It's not only what they learn and kind of what the knowledge and skills they emerge with, but what their life is like in schools. And so we might want to think about these goals for students as well. So the first thing is individual goals. The second is distributional goals, kind of is the initial idea of adequacy is that you set a minimum and everybody has to get above it. That's kind of the NCLB approach to what adequacy means. This is national data for 4th grade reading, and you can see I don't know if this is too complicated to see, but there's the poor students are in blue and the non-poor students are in red, and you can see that on average, poor students perform lower than non-poor students. Those 2 dotted lines are like the mean, so the lower one is the poor students, and the higher one is the non-poor students. And let's say we put adequacy at the line of the average of the poor students. You could see that would be definitely an improvement. Averages would go up, but you would still have these gaps at the top. So you would still have differences in who's scoring the highest. And if we think those kinds of things matter, like who are the elites, matter, then you don't want that we might not want adequacy just in terms of the lowest bar being how we define adequacy. So we have to think about distributional goals. The third is whether it's a process or a product. Is having an adequate system meaning all kids are achieving adequacy, or is having an adequate system something about getting kids to be more, aiming for more than adequacy for kids' outcomes so that we've got some equality and other things going on, but also understanding that we're not there yet. And so to say a system is bad because all the kids aren't at some kind of level of adequacy is a really high standard. And one that, that's one of the problems with NCLB, of course, is that that was just an unrealistic standard, and what we should be working towards is a system that is getting us to this place. And it has enough money to get there, it has enough of other things to get us there. Okay. So the fourth thing is, how do we know if the system is getting there? And so we have to think, when we're thinking about adequacy and funding adequacy, what do we care about? What kind of outcomes do we measure for kids? What kind of processes do we measure? So if we think it's about the system being set up to get us to inadequate outcomes, whether those outcomes are minimums or equality, what kind of processes do we need to measure? What kind of inputs? And then finally, what's the technology? And this is a lot of what Mike has been working on, and what we just heard about is basically, what do we do to get there? And that's really hard. We need to make some trade-offs to get there. We need to overcome political barriers, and we actually just have to get a sense of what works. And we do some, I like research, we do some trial and error. There's lots of different ways to get there. So overall, as we have this discussion, I thought it would be helpful to keep these things in mind, that we have to think about the individual goals that we have for kids, both their outcomes and experiences, how we want those individual outcomes to be distributed, whether we're thinking about a process or a product as the goal of adequacy, or as what adequate means for our education system, how do we measure it, and then what kind of technologies get us there.